John Tavares suffers an injury during Leafs practice and immediately leaves the ice. So you see here in the corner, he kind of gets stretched out with his leg. And then it looks like he is definitely in discomfort. He does skate on his own, but definitely a scary scene at Leafs practice. And would not be ideal after, especially seeing Jake McCabe go down with an injury. The Toronto Maple Leafs do not need another valuable player going down with an injury. The other conversation for the Toronto Maple Leafs is, could they look at a veteran defenseman, and could they also target a New York Islanders defenseman? So there's been some rumors, and I do want to transition this to the John Klingberg conversation, because John Klingberg, former Toronto Maple Leaf, also former Dallas Star, there's a lot of rumors to suggest that he could be going back to Toronto or back to Dallas. But then there's another team in there that I'm going to have a conversation with. But let's first look at this report from Steven Rosner, and this came from Nick Kiprios, Sportsnet. Scott Mayfield as a player the Leafs forever would have interest in to shore up their back end. I've brought up the New York Islanders in reference to the Toronto Maple Leafs many times. I've talked about, you're talking Scott Mayfield, you're talking Adam Pelech, you're talking Ryan Pulock. There's three veteran defensemen that I've talked about that the Toronto Maple Leafs could target in a blockbuster trade to also get one of those centers in Jean-Gabriel Pageau or Brock Nelson. But really, this could be a universal conversation. Like, if I'm the Minnesota Wild, I am calling the New York Islanders and going, hey, what would it take to make Brock Nelson and Adam Pelech a Minnesota Wild? Like, imagine Adam Pelech on that left side next to Brock Faber. Again, I know Wild fans love Jake Middleton, but Adam Pelech would be an upgrade, I believe. And you could still have Jake Middleton as the second pair guy. And then on top of that, you're getting Brock Nelson, a Minnesota native, going to his home state. I think that'd be really cool. So throw in Minnesota into that as well. But I think the overall conversation is Scott Mayfield. I believe he's from St. Louis. Craig Berube just coached in St. Louis. I don't know. There could be a little bit of a stretch comparison there, where there's been conversations in the past where St. Louis has wanted him. Maybe Craig Berube had a say in that, and now he could be going to Toronto. Who knows? But he's a 6'5" right shot defenseman. He's 30 years old. His cap hit's not crazy, in the $3 million range. I think the only way this makes sense is if the Islanders take back the David Kampf and Calle Jarnkrok contracts, maybe attach a second-round pick to those guys, bring Scott Mayfield to Toronto. Maybe the Islanders also take a shot on a guy like Connor Timmins. That could make some sense. So I did want to go over that too. In terms of the live show today, there's a lot of breaking news and a lot of stuff coming out. And I do think that we should go over the John Klingberg stuff too, because that is relevant. So talking about John Klingberg, I'll pull up the latest tweet here from Darren Dreger of TSN. This is the latest update from today. So if you look at this, Darren Dreger, refreshing the Klingberg watch. As reported last night, 5 to 7 teams very interested in his return. Edmonton, Toronto, Ottawa in the mix. Also here in the Dallas Stars are in the chase as well. Colorado, ? Some feel the Oilers now are a primary target. Too soon to say. And then Puckpedia goes in there and says, as a player with 400 NHL games who was on injured reserve for 100-plus days last year, Klingberg is eligible to sign a one-year deal that includes performance bonuses. So what that references is, we've seen it in the past, is if you look at the conversation with there's been a few instances of this, but Connor Brown is one. You come back, you sign like a minimum type deal, but there's performance bonuses that go against the salary cap, but you can defer it into future years. So I think there's a scenario where a team like Edmonton, who maybe wants an offensive guy to be the second power play unit behind Evan Bouchard, you can sign him to a minimum NHL deal, like $800,000 or less, but around the $800,000 mark. And then you can get him just very cheap as like a seventh defenseman, and it won't affect your cap picture much. Same with Toronto. The Toronto Maple Leafs power play has really struggled. It's below average at this point. And I think in terms of like going back into 2024, like they're bottom 5. So when you talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs and their power play, you're talking about the likes of Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, John Tavares, Morgan Rielly, Matthew Knies. Like, these guys just haven't been able to figure it out together. So maybe it's going back to reviewing the quarterback on the power play. And I'm always going to have Morgan Rielly's back, defend that guy. But clearly he hasn't been himself this year for many points of the season. So I think if you can get a guy like John Klingberg for the power play, it makes sense. But beyond that, it drove me nuts watching John Klingberg. It really did. So if it's nothing more than 5 minutes of ice time per game, and you want to go with 7 defensemen, 11 forwards, and he's just playing power play time, I might be okay with that. It sounds crazy, but because the power play struggled so much, if you want this guy on the bench and he's playing literally just offensive zone starts, he plays maybe 4 or 5 offensive zone start shifts per game, 5-on-5, 30-second shifts. Outside of that, he's just playing power play time. I'd be okay with that. Beyond that, he cannot be playing any heavy 5-on-5 shifts. It just cannot happen.